Hi, this is Paul. Charles Taylor is a Canadian philosopher. You've heard me reference his book, A Secular Age. Two other books to reference. This one has a little different title. I think I bought it used. Short, easy-to-read book, Charles Taylor, The Ethics of Authenticity, and a much larger, harder-to-read book, Charles Taylor, The Sources of the Self. In even the little book, Charles Taylor makes the point that the transition from traditional to modern, the dismantling of hierarchy, liberation from birth and hierarchy. One of the important transitions that happens in this is the burden of self or self-creation, because at least what a traditional hierarchical society offered you, you were certainly imprisoned in that sense in the place of your birth. And now I would argue that Christianity dislocates this. And I would argue that it is in fact Christianity and Jesus it's so hard to talk about this stuff because on one hand, Jesus very much did bring an egalitarian spirit to it. Jesus tells his disciples that you are not to have masters among you, but you are all brothers and you have one master. But Jesus plays with this hierarchy constantly, and at the same time he tells them that, but then he says the greatest among you is the servant of all, and so he keeps inverting the hierarchies and he keeps playing with these ideas. And this takes hundreds and hundreds of years to sort of work its way through in the West, and so you can even mark it when I hear people talk about culture in the UK. You still have, in a sense, the vestiges of aristocracy or nobility in more traditional cultures, and in far more ancient cultures like India, even despite the attempt to make the caste system illegal. If you read something like a biography of Gandhi, you'll notice how the caste system was tremendously powerful even into the 20th century in India, and it may continue to be powerful today. I don't know. I'm by no means an expert on India, but so in almost every traditional society, you have a hierarchy, and you have people who are born to different stations, and you're locked into that station. And what happens in the secular West in modernity is that system is fractured. But what has happened is that, and this is what Charles Taylor, is really helpful with, that you have the burden of identity, where you have to create an identity and achieve an identity. And the thing about a traditional system is that you are born into a place in society, but at least you know what your place is. And what happens if your identity is achieved, that you don't know who you are because the world around you is not reinforcing, projecting, validating, telling you who you are. And what that has led to is, in our contemporary society, especially with the LGBT identity politics, not only in terms of sexual identity, but racial identity, you have this demand for affirmation, this demand for symbols of equality, this demand that society now reflect this egalitarian flatness. But of course, that's when you start talking about equal with respect to people, it's equal with respect to what? Because I'm taller than average and I'm heavier than average, and we all have all these different attributes. And again, part of what's been so helpful about John Vervaeke's project is that he's just illuminated so much of this. And so a human being has all of these aspects. And so you might say, well, what is the essence of Paul Vanderklay? Well, that's very, very different because I have all of these different aspects. And so then when it comes to the question of identity, how do we manage this if we're not born into something, if society doesn't locate us into something? I caught this article about Cyrus Dunham, and of course I recognize the last name Dunham from Lena Dunham, who had been the producer and star of Girls on HBO, which I've never seen, but it was quite talked about a number of years ago, and her younger sister that she wrote about in the memoir, and this incident that happened between them, and all of the chat about that. And then this pops up, Cyrus Dunham, and looked at the picture and thought, something going on with that person. And then a little bit more digging, and just the title lets everyone name themselves, and that has become such a common thing today. You don't receive even your name or your identity from your parents, but now not only do you have the choice to create your own identity, but now the burden to do so. And when it comes to, and all of this is in search of this new value we have of authenticity. But how is authenticity to be achieved? It seems to be achieved basically by self-assertion. But that self-assertion, which is a choice and perhaps one might think an opportunity, in the same moment becomes a burden. And if authenticity is a function of choice, you need to change from a received identity in order to achieve authenticity. I love the videos that the Distributist, this little series of 4 about the political YouTube. And in the second episode was looking at Jordan Peterson. The third episode was looking at, I just had her name in my anyway. Well, one of the things that he noted in that third episode was how so many of the progressive YouTubers were themselves transitioning. And again, this would be far beyond any imagined statistical sample. I mean, before 10, 15, 20 years ago, the number of people who would be having gender dysphoria and transitioning would have been a tiny, tiny group of society. But now we find so many people in this process. And then the question is why? Well, I think part of it has to do with the fact that, well, their identity has to be achieved. And since authenticity is a function of choice, you need to exhibit choice and change in order to achieve an authentic identity. So if you were assigned at birth one sex, then you need to transition. Otherwise, you won't be authentic. If you stay with whatever identity you were given by society, that just screams inauthenticity. And so authenticity must therefore be achieved. And once you assert it, your demand on everything and everyone around you is that they validate and affirm. And so what you, in a sense, do with this little dance. Now you have celebrities with tremendous power and tremendous fame and visibility and money and all of those things. I mean, they're in a sense superheroes that can do this. But for regular people like you and like me, how are you going to get to? And so then we get to moments where we demand, we have the state then, and the institutions, we have the medical establishment perform affirming surgery upon us, and we have the state mandate pronouns and some of these things, and even the entire state, the role of the state is to affirm me. But that gets seriously problematic when we consider the other functions that the state must fulfill. And I think this actually intensifies into what I call tribal Othello. Now, Othello was this little game that I'd play as a kid where you had these little markers, little pancake markers that were white on one side and black on the other. You can find it on computers, sometimes called Reversi on old versions of Windows. And of course, the game is if you can frame a different colored piece and you frame it, you flip it. And that's how the game is played. Well, if we have the need to have our society and everyone around us affirm and validate our identity, Well, suddenly this individual game then becomes a communal game. And we have these communities that are at war. I just watched the Dave Chappelle special on Netflix last night, and he used an image of this people in the car, the L and the G and the B and the T, all in the car, and then the Q comes in the car. And so you can watch Dave Chappelle on Netflix, and Dave Chappelle on Netflix, I think, tries to offend just about everybody he can in that little show. But Dave Chappelle is just so charming and has so much status that he could say the most outrageously offensive things and kind of smile and take a step back and kind of take a step back on the stage. And it's this whole drama where it affords us this other space where we can deal with these issues that are too hot to talk about in polite company. But this all then gets tribal. And so this hyper individualization ironically leads to an obsessive tribalism and border protection, because my very identity is now me and my tribe must survive, and we must flourish. And the way we survive and flourish is, thank goodness, not yet to kill people of the other tribes, because actually team boy and team girl need each other if there's ever going to be team baby. And so we're locked in this tribal combat, and influence is the name of the game. And so what we're looking to do is flip the others continually, and that then becomes the game we watch with internet debates, and we're trying to flip each other in terms of their positions, and we flip them by outflanking, and that's now the central game of tribal warfare. And it's basically frame combat by flipping. And we have this tribal Othello that plays out between atheists and Christians, and Democrats and Republicans, and progressives and conservatives, and just about any tribe that you can mention that we need in order to establish our authentic identity. We have to play this flipping game so that we can come out on top. Now, this makes high status liminal figures really important. Now, there's a reason that these people in Hollywood that are beings of light that we see on our screens, we call them stars, because we navigate our lives by them. Because what is happening up in the heavenlies of Hollywood and on our screens is what slowly filters down into the days of our lives, into what happens on the ground. It's contemporary astrology, but we're not looking at the physical stars in the heavens. We're looking at the stars on the screens. And when those stars do things, they happen down here on Earth. Whenever I try to explain astrology to people in terms of the ancient world, I always note that if you look at a weather map of California, we're always looking out over the ocean, because we know what the weather will be over California by what is out over the Pacific Ocean. And they will know what the weather over the middle part of the United States will be, because it's the weather over California first. And so, in a sense, in the ancient world, because life came from heaven down, heaven was the control room of Earth, everyone looked up at the stars, and the ways that the stars moved predicted the ways that things would move on Earth. Well, this is now happening and continuing to happen in Hollywood, because the stars are the ones who are telling us what our lives will be. And so what happens in the stars will play out in our lives. But these liminal figures in the constellation, the ones who are on the borders, and very much Jordan Peterson was a liminal figure, because he was a professor at the University of Toronto, and he started complaining about pronouns in C16. That's what caught my attention about him, because I thought, well, that's strange. That star is realigning. And then all the drama around Jordan Peterson and his personal faith. Do you believe in God? All of this interest and attention surrounding that had everything to do because he was a liminal figure, and I act as if God is real. And so Sam Harris wants to talk to him to maybe get him to stop talking about this God stuff, and Sam is able in their comments to back him on stage into, well, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? And, well, we can't say for sure, and even Sam would say that, but Sam would say almost certainly not. Jordan, won't you share with me in saying almost certainly not? And so game then is created around Jordan of can we get Jordan out of this liminal space? Can we flip him and have him join Team Christian? And once he gets on Team Christian, can we flip him and have him be on Team Roman Catholic or Team Orthodox or Team Protestant or Team Christian Reformed or because we want to get the stars in our camp, because if the stars are in our camp, then they will affirm our identity and we will not only have our authenticity, but we'll have some permanence. And the same stuff is happening right now with Kanye, and the Kanye stuff happening right now is super interesting to me for a lot of reasons, and I want to make a video about it, but I'm not just, even though my videos are rough draft, my thinking is still too rough, and I don't know enough about them, and so I'm trying to get up to speed on this. But so these individual stars we're looking to flip so that we can have our identities affirmed. Now, one of the things that happens in this game is that what we want to do is flip them on camera. Because what does that do to my status? If I'm the pastor that talks to Jordan Peterson and Jordan Peterson says, "Oh yeah, Paul, I'm gonna start going to church. I'm gonna start going to your brand of church. I'm gonna enjoy your brand of religion." And then we go from one game into the next. But that's the big game. We want to flip them on camera. And I think John Vervaeke, again, he's been such a wonderful source of language and observation. He notes that, in a dialogue, there's this mutuality that goes forward. But this kind of internet debate is all about winning. And there's something, we feel that there's something wrong about that. We feel that something is threatening to be violated in terms of an arena of mutual respect and conversation. And so my team's victory is at the expense of the other tribe. And so if I can flip this liminal figure, if I can flip this other figure, if Sam Harris talks to, pick some pastor, Sam Harris talks to William Lane Craig and decides, okay, I'm a Christian now. And then all the Christians rejoice because Team Christian has now, gotten a win. And so we have this game that's being played. And what we're looking for, again, partly is because we're so weak and insecure. We look for, we want to see identity lost in real time. And so if we see that, then maybe we'll be influenced by that and we'll make that flip. And I think Christians should know better, because I think Christian conversion is finally a humiliation. And I said that in the meetup on Sunday night, and people kind of stopped and thought, why? What do you mean Christian conversion is a humiliation? Because in many ways right now, Christian conversion is the most inauthentic thing you can do from the point of view of our culture of authenticity, because you relinquish your claims on the self and you ask to receive another. That's what Christian conversion is. And it's the Oxford groups led to AA, and in AA you have to get to the point of saying, I am powerless over, might be alcohol, might be any of these, I'm powerless over these things, and I need a power greater than myself to come and transform me. In our culture of authenticity, it's the ultimate humiliation, because basically what you're saying is what is said in the first question and answer of the Heidelberg Catechism, that I am not my own. What is your only comfort in life and in death? That's the question. The answer is, I am not my own, but belong body and soul, and in life and in death, to my faithful Savior Jesus Christ. I am a slave, and that's what Christian conversion is. It means you no longer are yourself. You no longer lay claims to your own self, but you give yourself up to another, and you say, I am now owned by Jesus Christ. I've been bought by a price. I am no longer free. I am in bondage now to this other master. Now, as I said, Christian language inverts all this stuff, and that then becomes liberation, and there's all this complexity in Christianity. But Jesus says it in one of the most important passages. Then he began to teach that the Son of Man, now if you've been listening to my my Sunday school lessons, the last couple of weeks I've talked a lot about this Son of Man figure that comes out of Daniel 7. It's this heavenly figure that descends from heaven with the clouds and is given an eternal kingdom in Daniel chapter 7. And this is the name that Jesus uses for himself in the Gospels. When he talks about himself in the third person, often it's with this. And it's so strange the way he uses it, because he began to teach them that the Son of Man, who is this heavenly figure that descends with the clouds, must undergo great suffering. And they might tap him on the shoulder and say, now Jesus, haven't you read Daniel 7? The Ancient of Days puts down the imperial beasts that come, these sea monsters that come out of the sea, and hands the kingdom over to the Son of Man who descends from heaven. And what do you mean the Son of Man will be killed by the beasts? That's flipping the script. That's not supposed to happen in Daniel 7. But Jesus says the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And nobody hears that part. He said this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, because Peter's like, hey, wait a minute. I started following you, and you're supposed to ascend and take a realm of power, and I'm supposed to get my payday when all of this comes about, and you're supposed to be more like a Maccabee than one of these people that gets killed by the Romans and by the religious leaders. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, in other words, Peter takes him aside. Look, Jesus, I don't want to humiliate you, but you kind of got this wrong. You can't talk this way, because we're the winners. We're the ones who flip over everyone else's tiles. And Jesus busts out of that and says, what he's about to say now is, really at Peter's expense. But he turned and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter in front of the other disciples and said, "Get behind me, Satan. Wow. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." What? Isn't God about winning? Just read the book of Job. Doesn't karma tell us what's on the mind of God? That the wealthy and beautiful and powerful people, they're the ones that are blessed by God, and the poor people and the little people of the earth, well, they deserve to have their lesser station. Okay? Notice all the hierarchy and all the stations again. And then he called to the crowd. See, first, Peter tries to take him aside and rebuke him quietly. And he turns to the disciples and rebukes Peter. Then he turns to the whole crowd. And now all the disciples are going to be humiliated. He called the crowd with the disciples and said to them, "If you want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." Take up their cross. Read Dominion and look at those Tom Holland things on the internet about the Yazidi and the ISIS was crucifying the Yazidi, and how Tom Holland had a very real sense of what crucifixion is. Crucifixion are weapons of state terror, which are used to demonstrate the power of the state over regular people and anyone who would resist their power. And Jesus says, "Take up the cross." What? Take up my humiliation, take up my public, you're going to strip me publicly and lift me up on a tree, and I'm supposed to embrace this? If anyone wants to be my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their lives will lose it. And those who lose their lives for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Christian conversion is a humiliation. And, most of us, if we get humiliated, we'd rather not have it happen on YouTube. And if it's going to happen, and if we're going to make our peace with it, it's probably going to be sitting on the edge of Jordan Peterson's proverbial bed, looking into the great maw, the great darkness, and recognizing our own sinfulness, and asking, "God, will you have me? Will you have me who has missed the mark, has not lived up to my potential, who has made a mess of my life? Will you have me?" That's what Christian conversion is. It's a humiliation. But there's surprising freedom in that humiliation. I want to play a clip from Andrew Clavin, and I hesitate to use Andrew because, in terms of his profession and what he does on Daily Wire, he's politically charged, and again, politics is about the now, but religion is about the always. And I really enjoyed his memoir, The Great Good Thing, that tells the story of his conversion. And there's an ironic comfort in the contemporary world with respect to this. There's a surprising freedom, because the flip side of that choice, that self-assertion, is you always need to be doing it, and you need to always be trying to convince other human beings, which is the hardest thing in the world if you've ever met a human being, trying to convince other human beings to affirm you. And what this contemporary way of identity actually makes you is a slave to the crowd. And you see Jesus here, the ultimate non-slave to the crowd, and everyone's trying to recruit Jesus and trying to flip him, and Jesus won't be recruited or flipped by anyone, and for that reason they kill him. But there's a surprising freedom when you give up this contemporary game, and you're relieved from the burden of self-creation, and you're relieved from the burden of communal validation, and you're relieved from the burden of defending your authenticity or your pride. And I think Clavin really speaks, really articulates this well in terms of his own conversion.
I feel my own personal experience offers some hints on how to answer this question. For a long time, I was tangled in the web of some of our mainstream culture's most absurd self-deceptions. I struggled with them constantly in my thought and in my work. As a young man, a modern man, a sophisticated, urban, intellectual man, I was schooled in moral relativism from university upward. It was the intellectual sea in which I swam.
Now, Clavin is going to frame this in terms of truth and relativism, which I don't think is the most helpful frame. I understand the points that he's making with respect to this, but I want, as you listen to his story, I think it's helpful to listen to it in terms of self and renunciation.
The theme of all my early novels was the inescapable subjectivity of human perception, the impossibility of putting your hand or your mind on anything that could reasonably be called reality. All the heroes of my novels were bedeviled by the same questions. How can we ever know what is truly true, or whether there is truly truth at all? I was writing a novel called True Crime when I experienced a breakthrough. I was just turning 40 then, and was beginning to meditate on mortality. The novel is about a man on death row, which is to say it uses a man on death row as a metaphor for the human condition. In the opening scene, the condemned man awakens from a dream of freedom to find himself inescapably in his cell, undeniably awaiting execution. He reflects that there can be no true confusion between dreams and reality. Death itself draws the dividing line. Death puts a limit on the subjectivity of perception and therefore on the relativity of truth.
That the way Clavin frames it here is so Petersonian in that, Peterson keeps saying that he's not a Newtonian, he's a Darwinian. And it's right here where Clavin figures out that death is this ultimate no in the world. And whether it's the big picture or the small picture, you can look at my Sunday sermon last week. Death is, you don't get beyond it. You don't get around it.
That understanding was the beginning of my turn toward faith, my turn toward God. It had been a long, long journey to reach that crossroad. For most of my life, I was an agnostic, which means in practice, I was an atheist. I was born and raised a Jew. It was important to my father that my brothers and I were taught the rituals and traditions of the Jewish people, but neither of my parents had any active belief in God. Without God, religious rituals and traditions, wise and beautiful though they may be, seemed nothing but an empty show to me.
Okay, authenticity, inauthenticity. It's all about choice, and it's all about not only being affirmed, but affirming with your life and not being a hypocrite.
I was reluctantly bar mitzvahed by my father's decree, but in the aftermath, I felt like a hypocrite. I had declared myself a living member of a faith, but I had no faith because I'd been raised to have no faith. One night, when my family was asleep, I crept out of my house carrying a box full of the jewelry and savings bonds I'd received as bar mitzvah gifts. I buried the box deep in the trash can outside so it would be carted off by the garbage man in the morning before anyone found it. That was my declaration that I was done with the inauthenticity of godless religion.
There it is right there. Clavin had completely absorbed, without knowing it, exactly where society was. And he had enough integrity to not, in a sense, be bought by the bar mitzvah gifts. And if you read his memoir, it's a very powerful book. It's a very beautiful book.
From then on, through a mentally troubled youth, I was committed to what I and others have called the burden of unknowing. I continued to carry this burden even when, at 28, I went insane. I became crippled by rage and hypochondria. I was lost in self-aggrandizing fantasies and bizarre mysticism. I yearned for faith, but refused to give in to my yearning. I felt it would be weak and cowardly to use God as an imaginary lifesaver to keep me from drowning in my own misery.
He had to do it himself.
When I look back now, it's painfully obvious to me that God was continually calling out to his tormented child, but I absolutely refused to hear him. I was a modern man, a sophisticated man, an urban intellectual man. I was submerged in the relativistic insanity of modern, sophisticated, urban intellectual life. To acknowledge my supernatural creator would have betrayed my integrity as a thinker. I was trapped inside a genuine paradox. For me to accept the truth of God would have been dishonest. I believe that God, in his mercy, solved this riddle for me. He put aside his majesty for my sake. He even put his name aside in order to speak to me in secular terms I could understand and accept. Once, using this method, he even pulled me back from the brink of suicide. I was about 30 then. I was in despair. I was sitting alone in a dark room, plotting my own death. I was repeating over and over in my mind, like a mantra, the words, I don't know how to live. I don't know how to live. A baseball game was playing on the radio in the background. A hero of mine, the catcher, Gary Carter, hit a ground ball single. After the game, an interviewer asked him how he had managed to beat the throw to first base when his knees had been ruined by squatting in the catcher's position for so many years. Carter was a devout and outspoken Christian. He was always talking to interviewers about Jesus Christ this or praise Jesus that. I absolutely hated this about him. Every time he did it, it made me shudder as if someone had dropped a worm down the back of my shirt. If he had praised Jesus that day, I would have ignored him. But oddly, he didn't mention Christ at all. Instead, as I sat there reciting to myself, I don't know how to live, Carter said simply, sometimes you just have to play in pain. Those words struck deep into my heart. I seized on them instantly. I thought, I can do that. And I made the decision to live. Like all good modern men of that time, I was immersed in the atheistic ideas of Sigmund Freud. So God sent me a psychiatrist of genius who healed my mind and saved my life. It was only then when I found mental health and happiness and professional success, when I was no longer afraid that faith would merely be a crutch in troubled times, it was only then I was able to trust myself and to ferret out the flaws in the world's philosophy. It took me about 10 years to work it out. If there is no truth, then it can't be true that there is no truth. If death is real, then life also must be real. And if life is real, then our healthy perceptions of reality, our experience of love and the good, must be at least a human version of the truth and therefore grounded in ultimate truth. In mental health, I could see what I could not see in misery and madness, the logical steps that lead to God and the human experience of God, who is that worm down the back of our shirts, Jesus Christ. This discovery filled me and continues to fill me to this day with so much serenity and joy that I have sometimes gone before God and complained to him that he allowed me to waste so much of my life before I found him. I've said to him, Lord, Jew though I am, why did you let me wander in the wilderness for 40 years? Before I came into your promise. The answer I received was this: God wanted me to make every intellectual error it is possible to make before I stumbled like a gormless idiot on the simple truth. That way, even in jubilant sanity, I would have compassion on an intellectual world mired in so much unnecessary sorrow and pain.
It's our humiliation. And, the paths are different for each person. And they're not linear. And that's sort of what I don't like about the Methodist tradition of writing down in your Bible the moment of your change. I mean, the change is a process through many toils and snares. I have already come, but it's surprising freedom to not have to defend myself, to not have to. I've been bought with a price. I am not my own. I'm not smart enough to figure this stuff out. I'm not good enough to save myself. I don't even know who or what I am well enough to present an authentic self. I can instead rely on the other. Now this is where Kanye comes into the picture, because what I've been watching along with so many other people, the Kanye show, and I never followed him much before, and I didn't know much about him. And of course, he had made Christian noises before, and he had done this, but lately he's sort of taken it to a whole new level. And one of the things that you notice right away is the unapologetic Christian tropes that he's saying. I mean, if you're around the Christian community and you hear the stuff Kanye is saying, it's like, oh, this is, he's using all the cliches. And here you have a guy who's just, in so many ways, astoundingly creative, and he's using all the cliches, and it's like, what's going on with that? And it makes it easy to dismiss him. It makes it easy to sort of, he wears the MAGA hats, and he goes and he likes Trump, and then he calls out George Bush, and so this little still is from an interview which I found fascinating with Big Boy TV and Kanye, and you just listen to Kanye talk, and you just think, this guy is pure intuition and no filter. And it's just vroom, 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 vroom. It's just coming out there. Just nobody's gonna tell Kanye how to live, and he's just gonna do it. And if it's like cliche Christian tropes, there they are. And if it's something that Christians look at and say, well, that doesn't fit together, it doesn't matter. He's just gonna do him. He's just gonna do it. And so then he tells, I caught this when, he tells his wife that she shouldn't be wearing this stuff on TV, and it's like this woman has made a career out of doing what she does, and Kanye comes out, I'm a Christian, and I want our children to be Christian, and you shouldn't wear this, and well, she doesn't listen, but he still goes to the event with her, and it's like, well, this isn't some clean narrative that we imagine is going to somehow be victorious and full of something you can be proud of. And then his Sunday services, which I've one of them was posted, and I'm just so, again, because of when I was raised and how I was raised in Patterson, and so we always had black choir directors at Northside, and they would teach us these songs that are just the bread and butter of every black church, and it's always theme and variation in the black churches, and Kanye takes that, and I saw this one video where they're noting what he's doing in the Sunday service, and he's taking these other things in culture and he's adapting them, and it's just the exact picture of why Christianity keeps leaping over cultural bounds again and again in history, and every time someone imagines that they've got Christianity cornered, it just leaps out and colonizes a culture that you think is uncolonizable because it's too sinful or too wrong or too debased. And you just watch Kanye doing this with his Sunday service. And, then I saw an interview with Brad Pitt, and poor Brad Pitt is getting interviewed about stuff he doesn't know about. But then I guess he got invited to one of these Sunday services, and Brad Pitt makes all the nice, vague, generic, humanity affirming, life affirming things about Kanye's service. And it's like, yeah, how many times do they say Jesus in that service? And how many times don't they use these old Christian songs and these things that are in, that you can find in any black church? And then Kim Kardashian West gets asked about it on The View, and she says, well, that's just Kanye sort of doing his thing. And so it's with Kanye West, we're seeing just this astounding amalgam of that which should be offensive and derided and dismissed by the stars in our galaxy. And well, some of them are still doing that, but it's just him being him. And call him what you want, he's gonna do it. He's not gonna listen to you. And if you ask him why, he'll say, well, that's because this is all about Jesus. And people across the spectrum, trust me, people across the spectrum are going to scratch their heads and then say, oh, okay, this is just all about the tribal thing. And so if we can get Kanye in our tribe. And so, I so want to make a video about this, but I really haven't figured out exactly how to. So I saw, an interview with Kanye's pastor, and he's one of these guys that he went to Master Seminary, and this is John MacArthur and that whole section of kind of this weird reformed. And so there's so much here. I haven't been able to work it from intuitive into something that I can put in even the rawest rough drafts of these videos, which is what they are. But it's just all happening in Kanye right now, and I'm just fascinated by how you can't really box this thing in. And to me, every time I hear someone saying, well, Christianity has had its day, I say, look at Jordan Peterson and look at Kanye West. And now whole bunches of Christians and whole bunches of not Christians are going to, yeah, but, and he's not a real Christian, or he's doing this for money, or he's doing this for attention, or whatever you may be. But it's way too wild. It's way too untamed. And like I said, every time people think Christianity is in some corner, it leaps out. And this is exactly what Christ does with us as individuals. And then he pounces on us. And again, the story of Jacob wrestling with God is just perfect in that. And, the angel of the Lord says, let me go. And Jacob says, I won't let you go until you bless me. And he reaches down and he lames him. Now, of course, Jacob is running from Esau, and he's running from Esau as he's running from Laban. And he started this whole journey running from Esau at first because he stole his birthright. And Jacob is who we are. And so God lames him. And God says, basically, Jacob, I'm going to lame you. I'm going to take away every refuge that you have, and I'm going to show you that I'm going to bless you. And this is not you blessing yourself. This is me blessing you. And in the end, you will finally simply have to submit to me. And you will call it perfect freedom, and you will call it perfect joy. That's the Christian life. There's an old Walter Wangerin story that I'll play for you. And I found it. Marc Maron. Marc Maron, I listened to him years ago, and I heard an interview with him, and he was talking about, because he talks to Hollywood stars who become Christians. And Maron made an observation. He said, it's usually the Hollywood stars that can't seem to get sober or get their life straight in any other way. And Christianity is like the strongest drug out there. And they tried this and they tried that and they tried to fix their lives in all these ways. And when everything is a wreck, then they finally turn to Christianity. And Maron, who isn't a Christian, said, yeah, that's just that's where the absolute lowest class goes. And I think that's exactly right. That's why we shouldn't try to flip somebody on the internet in terms of let's make you a Christian and let's have the world see that it's me making you a Christian. Anybody who loves somebody else won't do that, because usually when we become a Christian, it's in a river of tears, and we finally give up. And we say, okay, Lord. And Kanye in that interview, all the corniest cliches, and he's just pulling him out. And so here's this uber cool, crazy, creative guy sporting these Christian, Jesus, take the wheel. And there he's doing it. And I just think, oh, wow.
Strange sight. I stumbled upon a story most strange. Like nothing my life, my street sense, my sly tongue had ever prepared me for. Hush, child. Hush now, and I will tell it to you. Even before the dawn one Friday morning, I noticed a young man, handsome and strong, walking the alleys of our city. He was pulling an old cart filled with clothes, both bright and new, and he was calling in a clear tenor voice, "Rags!" The air was foul and the first light filthy to be crossed by such sweet music. Rags! New rags for old! I take your tired rags, rags! Now, this is a wonder, I thought to myself, for the man stood 6'4" and his arms were like tree limbs. Hard and muscular, and his eyes flashed intelligence. Could he find no better job than this, to be a ragman in the city? I followed him. My curiosity drove me, and I was not disappointed. Soon the ragman saw a woman sitting on her back porch. She was sobbing into a handkerchief, sighing, shedding 1,000 tears. Her knees and elbows made a sad X. Her shoulders shook, her heart was breaking. The ragman stopped his cart. Quietly he walked to the woman, stepping round tin cans and dead toys and Pampers. "Give me your rag," he said to her gently, so gently, "and I'll give you another." He slipped the handkerchief from her eyes, and she looked up, and he laid across her palm a linen cloth so clean and new that it shined. She blinked from the gift to the giver. Then, as he began to pull his cart again, the ragman did a strange thing. He put her stained handkerchief to his own face, and then he began to weep, to sob as grievously as she had done, his shoulders shaking. Yet she was left without a tear. "This is a wonder," I breathed to myself. And I followed the sobbing ragman like a child who cannot turn away from a mystery. "Rags! Rags! New rags for old!" In a little while, the sky showed gray behind the rooftops, and I could see the shredded curtains hanging out black windows, and the ragman came upon a little girl whose head was wrapped in a bandage. Her eyes were empty. Blood soaked her bandage, and a single line of blood ran down her cheek. Now the tall ragman looked upon this child with pity, and he drew a lovely yellow bonnet from his cart. The child could only gaze at him while he loosened the bandage and removed it and tied it to his own head. The bonnet he set on hers. And I gasped at what I saw, for with the bandage went the wound against his brow. It ran a darker, more substantial blood. It was his own. Rags, rags, I take old rags, cried the sobbing, bleeding, strong, intelligent ragman. The sun hurt both the sky now and my eyes. The ragman seemed more and more to hurry. Are you going to work? He said to a man who was leaning against a telephone pole. The man shook his head. The ragman pressed him. Do you have a job? Are you crazy? Sneered the other. He pulled away from the pole and, revealing the right sleeve of his jacket was flat and the cuff stuffed into the pocket. He had no arm. So, said the ragman, give me your jacket, I'll give you mine. Such quiet authority in his voice. The one-armed man took off his jacket, so did the ragman, and I trembled at what I saw, for the ragman's arm stayed in its sleeve, and when the other put it on, he had two good arms thick as tree limbs, and the ragman had only one. Go to work, he said. After that, he found a drunk lying unconscious beneath an army blanket, an old man, hunched, wizened, and sick. He took that blanket and he wrapped it around himself, but for the drunk he left new clothes. And now I had to run to keep up with the ragman, though he was weeping uncontrollably and bleeding freely from the forehead, pulling his cart with one arm, stumbling for drunkenness, falling again and again, exhausted, old, and sick. Yet he went with terrible speed. On spider's legs, he skittered through the alleys of the city, this mile and the next, until he came to its limits, and then he rushed beyond. I wept to see the change in this man. I hurt to see his sorrow, and yet I had to see where he was going in such haste, perhaps to know what it was that drove him so. And the little old ragman, he came to a landfill. He came to the garbage pits. And then I wanted to help him in what he did, but I hung back, hiding. He climbed a hill. With tormented labor, he cleared a little space on that hill. Then he sighed. He lay down. He pillowed his head on a handkerchief and a jacket. He covered his bones with an old smelly army blanket. And he died. Oh, how I cried. How I cried to witness that death. I slumped into an old junked car, and I wailed and mourned as one who has no hope, because I had come to love that ragman. Every other face had faded in the wonder of this man, and I cherished him. But he died. I sobbed myself to sleep. I didn't know. How could I know? I slept through Friday night and Saturday, and its night too. But then, on Sunday morning, I was awakened by violence. Light, pure, hard, demanding light slammed against my sour face, and I blinked, and I looked, and I saw, and the last and the first wonder of all was before me. There was the ragman, folding the blanket most carefully, a scar on his forehead, but alive. And besides that, healthy, no sign of sorrow, nor of age, and all of the rags that he had gathered shined for their cleanliness. Well, then, I lowered my head, and trembling for all that I had seen, I myself walked up to the ragman. I told him my name with shame, for I was a sorry, sorry figure next to him. Then I took off all my clothes in that place. And I said to him with dear yearning in my voice, "Dress me." And he dressed me. My Lord, he put clean rags on me, new rags. And I am a wonder beside him, the ragman, the Christ.
That's Walter Wangered's story. I think I'm going to play a song for you. I got permission to play this from Ken Miedema. Ken Miedema he grew up in Western Michigan. I think he played piano at my junior high graduation. He's blind. He's a musician. And he's got you can find him on the internet. He's quite a talented guy, but his manager used to be the art teacher at my high school, and he and his wife, I think, managed Ken Miedema. And so I got permission to use this song in my videos. I've never managed to make a nice opening or closing out of my videos. Let's see. Let's get to something here. Make a nice closing or opening or closing out of my videos, and I thought if I ever do an intro or an outro, I want to use this song because I think this song is for the Jordan Peterson moment. I'm right on Jordan's head this time. Here it is. This fun little. So David Fuller and Ollie came out to Sacramento on one of their West Coast tours and shocked my little church something horrible that people from the United Kingdom would come out and take video of their pastor. And in that interview that I did with David, this is very early on in the whole Jordan Peterson thing, asked me about Jordan. I said, there's a certain stoicism in Jordan. And, he keeps talking about this hill and what's up this hill?
So, got a couple of minutes left, so this might be quite a big question. But just come back from the US where we interviewed Paul Vanderklay, a Christian pastor who's been doing quite a lot of videos about your thought. One of his questions was, he says he sees a real sort of stoicism in your thought. So pick up your cross and drag it up the hill. His question is, what's at the top of the hill? He doesn't
City
hear
of
that.
God. Well, that's because he hasn't listened to the times when I've been talking about it, I guess, because I've said it repeatedly. You stumble uphill with your burden towards the city of God. That's the story.
What does that mean, the city of God, to you?
I would say that's a place where everyone bears maximal responsibility and speaks the truth. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. And what's the responsibility? You're responsible for the suffering in the world. You're responsible for the malevolence in the world. And you're responsible for the veracity of your utterances. Right. And in the city of God, you're maximally responsible for the suffering. You're maximally responsible for the malevolence. And you speak the truth. That's what it is.
And I'd say that's a humiliation. Because if we figure out what we are maximally responsible for, no, we don't want that. We don't want to face that. And the reason we can't see God is because, or one of the reasons is that when we see the rag man in all of his glory and we look at what we're wearing, any sensible person would say, "Clothe me." Now, where does that leave us? Well, here's this Ken Miedema song, which I think says it.
Can you hear it down the ages, like a mighty trumpet sound, a call to leave the night and step into the morning? It's a call to joy and gladness in a world of war and pain, and yet it sounds a note of danger and of warning. It's a call to leave your treasures and your trinkets on the road. It's a call to join the weeping and to bear the sufferer's load. It's a call to live like fools by another set of rules. Well, it's a call to take your cross in hand and follow. Yes, it's a call to take your cross in hand and follow. It's a call to love the stranger, and it's a call to live as friends in a world that says good fences make good neighbors. And it's a call to face the makers of destruction and of war, and to lead the crew put down those guns and sabers. It's a call to plant the seeds of love on barren planet Earth. It's a call to live like fools by another set of rules. Well, it's a call to take your cross in hand and follow. Yes, it's a call to take your cross in hand and follow. I hear the music and it's calling. Born to be. Oh, if anybody would come after me, take up your cross and follow. It's a blood-stained invitation to a life of sacrifice, a call to walk the road that leads from here to glory. And it's a joyful expectation of the dawning of that day when God shall write the final chapter in the story. It's a call to be the lowly, and it's a call to be the least, and it's a call to join the fasting that shall lead to a final peace. Well, it's a call to live like fools by another set of rules. Well, it's a call to take your cross in hand and follow. Yes, it's a call to take your cross in hand and follow. I hear that music and it's calling me. Come and be all that you were born to be. And if anybody will come into me, take up your cross and follow.
Kind of feel like playing. Let's see if I can find it. Play one more.
Walk with me in the darkness, and as we walk along, I'll tell you quite a story, and I'll sing you quite a song. I'll sing of light and darkness, of victory and defeat, corruption on high mountains and compassion tonight. We'll walk into the city, and chaos is its name. And in its streets and alleys are the blind, the sick, the maimed, and the children cry for water, and relief seems out of sight, and they dream about tomorrow in the darkness of the night. For it's a long night, and weary grow the feet that walk the long road. But the morning will come sweet, yes, it's a long night, and the prince is in the streets tonight. Well, just outside that city, far from the blight and pain, sits a holy mountain fortress where life seems calm and sane. And there's feasting there and singing by tranquil waterfalls. And the street folks don't ever come there, 'cause they dare not climb the walls. And the gateway to the fortress, the man of sorrows cries, a prince in beggar's clothing, with compassion in his eyes. And the mountain folks, they won't hear him, so we'll turn his feet around, and the ruler of the mountains becomes the servant in the town. God, it's a long night, and weary go the feet that walk the long road, and the morning will come sweet. Yes, it's a long night, and the prince is in the streets tonight. mountains, for it's coming in the streets, for it's a long night, and weary grow the feet that walk the long road, but the morning will come sweet. Yes, it's a long night, and the prince is in the streets tonight.